All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Grace Oran. I'm the program director here at the Mayor's Institute on City Design, which is a leadership initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So excited to have you all with us today for this virtual seminar. Here's a quick agenda for the day. We will be doing some brief welcomes and introductions, and then we'll turn it over to our two speakers for about 30 minutes of presentations on topics that have been requested many times over the years at MICD: how to rethink your community engagement processes and your design guidelines to get development that better suits your community, that fits its unique character, and better serves all of your residents. Then we'll have an open discussion among the folks who are in attendance today. So a bit of context for today's event here at MICD. We typically host very small in-person institute sessions where mayors from around the country bring a case study project from their city and receive candid feedback from a group of design experts. We've expanded our programming in the last few years to include the MICD Just City Mayoral Fellowship, follow-up advising for recent alumni mayors, and these virtual seminars, but we'll really bring that original small group candid spirit to today's event with an off-the-record Q&A after the presentation. So please note that it's only other mayors and city staff in the Zoom room with us today. And we'll make the presentation available publicly after the event, but we'll never share the group discussion that takes place afterwards. We really welcome your candid thoughts and questions on this topic. And to that end, I encourage you all to say hello in the chat, share your name, your city, and your role, just so you know who all is in the room with us today. And with that, I will hand it over to MICD Executive Director, Trinity Simons-Wagner. Trinity.
All right, thank you, Grace. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining us today. Thanks, Grace, for that overview of our program. So, as most of you know, key to all of the work that we do at the Mayor's Institute is this belief that the mayor is the city's chief urban designer. They are the chief convener, the vision setter, the shepherder, the one who can keep their city moving forward, always striving to have a more livable, resilient, equitable, and thriving community. And all of our programs are geared towards preparing and supporting mayors to harness that role. But in the 38 years of our programs, the over 1,200 mayors who have participated in our programs, we get a number of questions that keep coming up and that keep percolating around. Why do so many new developments look the same in my community? How do we do design guidelines? Should they be stricter, or should we untangle the ones that we have that limit creativity? How do we do them in a way that doesn't increase costs but sets expectations for the development community? Why aren't our community engagement processes, where we spend so much time, resulting in projects that help those same communities benefit? In short, what is good design and how do we get more of it in our cities? And so we've been tackling virtual seminars that start to address some of these questions, get this conversation going. We don't have all of the answers, but we're happy to be facilitating these conversations. And today we're excited to uplift how the city of Boston has been approaching some of these challenges. We've been watching how Boston Mayor Michelle Wu has brought creative leadership, embracing her role as the city's chief urban designer the last few years. In particular, building the Boston Planning Department from the ground up under city control. She's empowered her team to try a bold new approach to community engagement and urban design guidelines, which they've undertaken as the Boston Design Vision in partnership with Agency Landscape and Planning. We've been hearing about this effort for some time, and we're thrilled to have two of the leaders share what it is, how it worked, how it's working, really the kind of behind the scenes with you all today. And so at MICD, we are striving to keep this type of dialogue going through events like this, creating new tools and resources. So if you hear things today that are of particular interest to you, please let us know. If you're out doing work that we should know about, that other cities should know about as well, please let us know. And of course, if you have questions as we go along, drop them in the chat or the Q&A after the presentation. I see a number of you are dropping your name, your title, your role in your city in the chat. Please continue to do that so we kind of all know who is around us today. But we have two fantastic presenters with us today. I'm going to first introduce you to Diana Fernandez-Bibo, the Deputy Chief of Urban Design for the City of Boston's Planning Department. If Mayor Wu is the Chief Urban Designer, Diana is the deputy. But she works to elevate the importance of urban design, champion the transformative power of sustainable and walkable communities for people of all ages and abilities. She's been with the city through this transition from the Boston Planning and Development Agency to this new planning department and the design vision within it, and has led this year-long process of asking Boston's residents how they want to see their city designed. We also have with us Gina Ford, principal and landscape architect and co-founder of Agency Landscape Planning. Gina is a longtime MICD partner, has served on many resource teams, many of our programs at several institute sessions over the years. Is a talented designer and thought leader who cares deeply about how we design our public space for maximum good. Has led agency's team that worked with the Boston Planning Department in this effort. And so we're delighted to have you both here today to share lessons from your work with fellow city builders that we have in the room. I know that they will find all of this useful and inspirational. So welcome to Diana and Gina, and we'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Trinity and Grace, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us going here. But we're really thrilled to be here sharing this work, which, on a very personal level, I think is a real labor of love and a testament to what Boston really has to deliver for our city and its residents. So, what is the Boston Design Vision? I think when we started this work, it was really important for us as an urban design, division, going through the transition to ensure that we were having a conversation with the public about, what design excellence means across our city, and specifically, what does that mean across our different neighborhoods? What does it mean to elevate the sort of diversity of our architecture, the diversity of our people and its neighborhoods through the work that we do here? So really for us, it was about kind of unlocking, urban design as really this art of making places for people. We also spent a lot of time thinking through, how these neighborhoods are different, right? That our city is not, just one image, that there's so many different distinct pockets of community, of architectural types, of urban form that define our city. And we wanted to really embrace that sense of, heterogeneity or difference as an important part of the work that we were doing here. So, the goal was to be able to understand that inherent diversity at a very granular level, and then to be able to translate that into an understanding of access and does our city and its neighborhoods in totality have access to good design, and how can we be working towards those equitable outcomes? A lot of the work that came out of the design vision itself was very much focused on how these design principles help to shape the work that we do working on behalf of our residents. So we spent this sort of year-long process meeting people really where they were. So we were showing up at BAMS Fest, which is this amazing sort of cultural festival, showing up at our open streets, hosting our own sort of focus group conversations to really hear from people. What are the principles that define good design for you? And how do we, as sort of planning and design professionals, embrace that to ensure that, we're empowering people through the work that we do? So the design principles themselves to us are a set of values that guide good design outcomes for the city's built environment. We see them as sort of anchor elements of things that support culture, place, identity, the feel, the empowerment that people in place have associated with their neighborhoods. And to us, these principles also help us to sort of, build an understanding of what we value and how, as a city, we are centering people and we're uplifting those sort of diverse lived experiences within, the vision we have for the growth of our city. So the first principle that sort of came out of this engagement, and I do want to note that the sort of imagery that you see here is also a reflection of the community feedback. We worked with the photographer, and Gina's going to talk a little bit more about this, but we had this incredible consultant team that allowed us to sort of really engage with folks and understand how these are representative of the things they value. So design from understanding is really that first principle for us. It's very much focused on this notion of, how is it that we are ensuring that as our city grows, right, we are understanding what is valuable, what are those key connections, what are the sort of tools that we can develop as a planning department to address those needs. So one of the key elements coming from design from understanding is that it's more than just a place. It's about observing those physical characteristics. What are the sort of, typologies here, the sort of heights, the pace of the street wall, where store frontages are, how the open space and sidewalks all work together to define a sense of place, and how do we take those sort of ingredients or elements or components and start to sort of embed that as a sort of starting point for new work and new development that would come online. We also, the design vision itself is on the premise, right, that we're a city that is growing. It's not a sort of static document. We don't see it as an element that, our city is what it is, and we want to capture it in this moment in time. We understand that it's going to evolve, and that we want to make sure that we're designing for that future, and that future of, housing growth, that future of resiliency, that future of being able to address climate change and those environmental impacts. So always sort of centering, great design practices around green building design, about reducing heat island effect, rising sea levels, and what that does and how it impacts the design of our built environment. And I do think that one element to highlight here is that for us, especially working in a coastal environment like ours, we have moments, right, where our built form or the architecture of our city is actually changing, given those constraints and that understanding of how we live in that future. We also wanted to identify, and I think as a true landscape architect here, I feel like our colors are showing, but designing beyond the boundary, that when we're talking about design within our city, it's not just about the building, right? It's not about, that particular element, but it's about the streets, it's the sidewalks, it's about zooming out and understanding how it's contributing to culture and place, how it's contributing to our broader sort of, complete street goals, our broader goals around transportation and mobility that help us sort of contextualize the project in something more than just its sort of architectural volume. And then I would say this principle is perhaps my favorite, which is this notion of designing the details. So, in the conversations we were having with members of the public, it was about those details. It was about the materials. It's about how these storefronts engage you. It was about the sort of, pop-up park or the seating area where you came together and had coffee with your neighbor. Like, these are the things that people really value. And it was so important for us to sort of center that those details is so important to that sense of culture and identity, and that we can imagine a future, right, where there is growth that is embracing some of these characteristics that are really beloved within a particular neighborhood. And so that is a little bit of a framing around the principles that came out of the design vision itself. And we did want to illustrate, I think, in this context, a bit about how these principles are applied to projects that we have within our city, as just a mere example of how we see these sort of elements shaping our city today, and also as a great reference point, right, for community members to sort of see and experience these spaces themselves. So the first one we want to highlight here is the renovation of City Hall Plaza. This was a really important project that really worked off of understanding the needs of diverse stakeholders, right? City Hall is a place where we want everyone from every neighborhood to feel welcome, to be invited in, to enjoy these spaces. And we had real issues around accessibility. So we had to think about not just improvements to the building itself, right? But how does a landscape respond to that? How do we think about building in green infrastructure and thinking about the many different ways in which this project is really leading with that. And then as it relates to sort of designing the details, I think something this project did so successfully, right, is a sort of integration of a playground at City Hall. Like, who would have thought that that would have been such a success? Who would have thought, right, that welcoming families and children to City Hall, to the sort of doorstep of our institution was such a welcome experience. And, you know, we got a lot of slack around, like, is that the appropriate thing for a civic space? And, you know, I go out there today and it's a rainy day. You still see people out there playing with the water features, you know, playing with the slides, and really engaging in a different way with City Hall. We also want to highlight our affordable housing projects. And this is a project that we approved in Brighton neighborhood. It's called the J.J. Carroll House. This went through really extensive sort of community feedback, and there were a lot of trade-offs. This really was focused on being able to sort of, you know, design with residents in mind and thinking about the sort of senior community aging in place. And how the architecture and design of this building itself was sort of leading towards reducing carbon emissions, achieving LEED goal, and setting best practices for what affordable buildings can do. And in addition to that, right, it was thinking about how we design these details and think beyond just the building envelope itself, but how are we welcoming the community into this particular project? There's this incredible sort of open space, series of open spaces that define and anchor key entrances. And we've even introduced some of these sort of, you know, elements of play that are meant to be intergenerational and bringing some of that sort of older community to the sort of front porch or front yard of the building program itself. And I think these are details that are quite minor, but are really important. This notion of the sort of materiality, right? The sort of warm textures here that are building off of the context of the place this project is situated within, and really speak to sort of welcoming folks into the site. And, you know, in our city, we're not just doing big projects. There's also projects that are at the sort of infill residential level. And something that was really important to us as a urban design division was to ensure that we were talking about some of that fabric and thinking through how, you know, whether you are, you know, you own an older home, there are ways in which you can achieve these goals. And this is a great example in Roxbury, in the Highland Park community, where, you know, working with the sort of historic preservation community to understand what is really important about the character, the picture, the roof, right? That can help to sort of lead on those fronts. And then to sort of be able to put in, you know, solar panels and think about charging stations that really start to sort of, you know, set this project up for the next 100 years. And again, the sort of details as it relates to its context and understanding that there's all this incredible sort of open space and green infrastructure that came online as part of this renovation, again, are a testament to this working at even a sort of smaller, more granular scale. And, you know, we also are working with projects that are, you know, 10, 20, 30-year visions, right, for where development will go. And this project here in Charlestown is an example of a 5-acre waterfront that was seeing redevelopment. It was a site that was an industrial site in nature, mostly parking lots, and is being reimagined as not only, you know, future density for residential and commercial uses, but also bringing to bear much needed resilient infrastructure to protect the neighborhood through this sort of 22-foot flood barrier that would protect about 320 acres of Charlestown on the interior. And I do think that this project is a real testament to sort of, building off of the industrial character of Charlestown, thinking about the different various scales of brick and metal that really speak to that sort of craftsmanship that is something this community really held as a prideful element that we advance. And then, this project here, if you guys are familiar with Boston, this is sort of the old Sears building, but this is the project in the Fenway. It's called The Green at 401 Park Drive, that really looked at, how is it that you are designing, for a sort of restoration of a historic element, and also understanding the context of being right next to the Emerald Necklace and the Back Bay Fens as a real opportunity to think about open spaces that are complementary and additive, right? That the space here at the Green has a sort of Trillium beer garden, it has all these, yoga in the park, which are things that aren't necessarily happening right within the Emerald Necklace, but are seen as an additive feature and bringing more foot traffic to this part of town. And again, sort of thinking about the sort of interstitial weaving of these different elements together. And then the last project I want to highlight here is our Boston Food Forest. And something that we've really learned through this design effort is that, design excellence isn't just these beautiful glossy images of very refined and very expensive projects, but it's also things that are much more granular. They're much more about community building. And we really wanted to highlight this initiative here with the Boston Food Forest Coalition, where we're really working on these sort of, either vacant lots or areas in our city where we can start to think about access to food and self-reliance and building community. And to us, this really speaks to the sort of biodiversity of our spaces, designing for impermeable surfaces at a much more micro level within our city. And that this design has value. It may look aesthetically different, but there's real opportunity and sort of tailoring these food forests to different locations that we think has been something to highlight and celebrate within our community. And with that, I'm just going to hand it to Gina, who's kind of going to walk us through some of the design ideas that also came about with this design work.
Thanks, Diana. Thank you so much. And really thrilled to be here, team. I'll just say that this has been a really, really unique effort. So we'll walk through the design ideas chapter, but I wanted to pause here and acknowledge a client team that gave us a really, really unique brief, one that stretched us sometimes, one that challenged us to think about new ways of conducting process. But at the end of the day, I think when I reflect on what the work has been, it's really been a process of understanding how to better explain how great design can be born of observation and community engagement, and codifying that and making it clear through examples, through the principles that Diana showed. But the acknowledgement I want to make to the client team is that they came at this RFP when we first saw it with a really unique brief that had things like start the process by reaching out to luminaries who are doing the best work in the country around design for diversity and innovation, formulate a process of understanding how to conduct a vernacular analysis and an observation process that you build from, and give us some really incredible grounded community engagement. So it was a dream to work on this and challenging at times. So just wanted to acknowledge the incredible uniqueness of the brief. But I'll show you just briefly some of the design ideas that follow from the principles Diana shared. A lot of us are Bostonians. We love our city. It's a unique place. It doesn't have a traditional grid. Our city is kind of when you look at it on a map, it's very convoluted in so many ways. Our squares are usually triangles. They're traffic islands more than public spaces. But I digress. When we looked carefully at the city and we talked with folks, we came up with three major sort of buckets of strategies for the physical expression of this plan. The first, and probably one of the most important, was neighborhood main streets, just the importance of Boston as an agglomeration of smaller communities over time, and how that gives us kind of neighborhood centers that are really critical in the role that those play in everyday life. The spaces between buildings, as Diana noted, streets and parks, how they're being used that are very different than the way they were designed, and how we might take cues from that and offer more equitable access. And then lastly, housing. Like Boston, like so many places, has a real need for more diverse kinds of housing, to offer more affordable housing and more diversity of unit types to really enable more families to stay and young folks to stay. I just wanted to also, on the next slide, acknowledge briefly that this was an incredibly diverse and interesting team. I think it's part of the reason why we were selected for this effort. Agency Landscape and Planning, my firm, myself and my business partner, Bree, along with Annie and a big team at agency, Alan, Jamaica, Devendra, led this team effort, but we put together a team of folks that we thought brought really diverse skills. Dream, an incredible practice here that does a lot of work around development, vertical development and architecture and urban design. Consult Layla, great grounded local engagement specialist. Mel Isidore, who helped us with urban research, but also graphic design, very incredible visual storyteller. And then lastly, a kind of lovely colleague, OJ Slaughter. They really brought to the table, a photographer, they brought to the table ideas about how art could inform this process. And I have to say they were part of every kind of major engagement and strategy here. So an acknowledgement of our incredible team. And together, we went out, we pounded the streets, we got to looking and learning, we talked to the community, and we came up with a series of strategies. When we think about the streets of Boston, Diana loved this because I think we had an intellectual idea about what we learned, and then we actually spent Fridays throughout the summer walking the streets of Boston. And we could see that while they were designed well for mobility uses, there was a lot of other kinds of uses the community was sort of making happen, even though it wasn't really designed for it. So you saw a mother with her kids trying to keep them occupied on the sidewalk, but there was nothing for them to do, or a guy kind of fixing his car in a parking lot or a parking spot. Pop-up activities, you heard music and people pulled over, and parties in alleyways. And so we really wanted to codify that there was another layer we could add on to streets that could make them more green, as you can see, more open to small scale commerce and kind of pop-up incubator business opportunities, more healthy opportunities to engage people in their fitness regimes, and then in play streets. We also had this one called Chill Streets, which was our way of acknowledging more spaces for people just to hang out and people watch. It's not always about passing through, it's sometimes about stopping and lingering. We also wanted to codify a series of potential innovations within the space of parks. So while Boston has an incredible park system and does incredible work to advance it, including lots of ongoing initiatives here to some of the most essential spaces of the system, we think there's opportunity to expand the way we think about what accessible park spaces mean. So these strategies, as you can see, talk really about how do we expand the way we think about public health and wellness in park spaces, by providing more sensory places, by providing more opportunities to feel safe and comfortable. How do we make places feel more welcome and inclusive, including how do we introduce plants from different places that folks of diverse backgrounds might relate to more? How do we think about multi-generational space? Really thinking about the 8 to 80 population concept of you want kids and you want elders, and you want everything in between. So design parks for that. And then climate adaptation, which we think there's a huge opportunity in Boston that's just starting to grab hold of. We also talked a lot about housing. In this work, we defined two kind of big buckets. One was diversifying kind of the housing types. So looking for things like accessory dwelling units, courtyard buildings, row houses, courtyard buildings that offered more access to community and to open space, and even some high density opportunities. What we see in Boston, which I'm sure you all see in your communities in the past decade, has been a lot of housing units that look almost the same as they look in any other city, you know, the 5 stories, 4 or 5 stories, 6 stories. And what we were saying here is diverse opportunities allow for more diverse people and diverse family types. We also heard so much from the community, and this was a surprise and a lesson learned to me, although it's perfectly logical, that it's almost as important, that interface between the housing unit and the public space or the public street. That's really a critical piece of feeling like you're part of a community. So many of the buildings we've seen developed in many cities over the past decade have been those blank kind of facades with no individual outdoor space, no porch space, no front stoop. And these are the places where you really connect with community. So this was us codifying some of those ways buildings could better meet the street to enable more community. And then we heard extensively when we asked people what made them feel most at home in their neighborhoods or in their places throughout the city, they talked a lot about small businesses, food that they love to eat, places that had smells that when they smelled it, they knew they were home, places where they could get authentic and oftentimes really diverse retail offerings. But again, new development has really prioritized the big box, single floor kind of retail plate. So here are recommendations we made to think about how we create more care and how we detail the ground floor, how we create more fine-grained and small-scale incubator spaces within given blocks to really enhance this idea of the small business and its critical role on Main Street. Thanks, Diana. Over to you.
Yes. And what we want to do here is sort of end our presentation with what's next. What we shared with you today is a small snapshot of all of the analysis and work that went into this, but we really want to focus on what the design vision is. It's, to us, a 5-year strategic roadmap, and it consists of recommendations that focus on policy, process, and projects that are aimed at advancing these values. So a lot of the work that we shared with you is that's great. It came out of this and will be codified within a report, but there's so many more projects that are going to be coming out of this work that we hope to implement within the next 5 years. So I just want to walk you through these pretty quickly. The first is that we really broke these projects into sort of different stakeholders and how they're going to benefit. So one of the recommendations that's coming from the design vision is the People's Planning and Design Academy. So something we heard a lot through this community process is well, we just don't even understand the language that you're using to even engage with us. We don't understand zoning. We don't understand planning and how you go about this. And we looked at a bunch of really great examples around the country, thanks to the work that Gina and the team did to sort of assess, how can we calibrate a version of this type of educational model that is focused on Boston. And it's almost like an academy, right? That there's a set of 101 courses and 102 courses that allow us to sort of dig deep and start to build champions within our city, right? That are versed in this. And we're really excited to actually be launching this program and releasing an RFP in the new year. As I mentioned earlier, when I was talking about the design from understanding principle, we didn't just want to keep it at a principle level. One of the incredible things that came out of the design vision itself was a sort of vernacular analysis, what we're calling here a neighborhood character analysis tool. And this is something that we're actually embedding into our own planning and design process, and also looking at it being a wonderful opportunity for us to include this through the development process. And the key piece here is that, agency and Gina and the team really worked on developing a methodology for how to do this type of observation. There's sort of 3 folks that go out and there's a set of research questions that really focus in on how to observe, how do I understand culture and place. And we see this as sort of the building blocks for development and design, right? That we could have developers and architects across our city using this as a tool to be able to sort of, counter much of the feedback that we get from residents. It's like, this isn't contextual. This doesn't look like my neighborhood. Why is this coming here? And that we think that the act of actually going through this analysis tool and this methodology has enlightened, it certainly enlightened us when we did it. And I think we have been testing this actually in various planning initiatives, and we've seen great promise in the community really seeing themselves in the work and seeing how we are being thoughtful about those design elements that they so care about. We also want to spend a little bit of time as well through this effort focusing on case study research and specifically evaluating the sort of success of some of these design elements. So, I think Trinity mentioned this earlier in her introduction, but, we're asking for these things of development projects. Are they valuable, once they're built? Are these things that the community really sees as success? And given the wonderful set of institutions here in the city, we're looking to sort of partner on establishing some of those institutional partnerships to assess some of the projects that have gone through our Article 80 development review process and see what design elements are valuable to community and to the developers, and see how we can take that information and calibrate our design guidelines and regulation to address what we're seeing actually in real time. And we also see this as a mechanism, right, for creating accountability, right? That these elements aren't just, grounded in our own analysis, what we think these sort of priorities or values are, but that there's real accountability for neighborhood and community impact. As I mentioned earlier too, language is power, and we heard time and time again, you guys we don't even know what public realm means. We don't even know what urban design means. Help us understand what these terms mean in a way that is accessible to the public. So we're actually working on defining these terms and releasing these to the public, and we see it as a complement to the People's Planning and Design Academy. And, one thing to note too is that when we first launched our website for the design vision, we ran it through our system and of reading accessibility, and it came back at a master's level. And it was this real wake-up call where it's like, okay, we need to get this down to at least an 8th grade reading level. And that took a lot of intention. And as you can see here, the terminologies that we're using around the principles are meant to be accessible, are meant to be things that people can really understand as day-to-day non-planners. I shared the principles here. We are adopting this as policy. It's actually going to our board next tomorrow. So we're really excited to have this become a formal policy document that guides the work that we do within the planning department. And many of the design ideas that Gina shared earlier are actually becoming design guidelines. So we saw the design vision as sort of being a precursor to some of those elements. And we're releasing our first set of guidelines in the new year focused on multifamily housing. And then one of the key things, right, is that a lot of this isn't just about how we tell developers or how we do this work ourselves, but thinking internally about what are the process reforms that we could be doing as a department. And specifically, I think one of the premises of the design vision is that we want to codify diversity. We want to celebrate that, and that many of the policies and regulations we have in place were actually precluding that, right? And that this was a real opportunity for us to do an audit of our design review process and assess where we can make changes to our own policy to realize this vision and to create greater transparency around the work that we do. And then finally, I want to share the sort of database for community and cultural assets. This is something that we are launching, have launched already through our Squares and Streets initiative, which is a sort of transit-oriented development project. And it's basically a GIS platform where we're taking a lot of this sort of cultural asset mapping and creating it as an open source data set that informs the work that we do. And again, we hope to kind of grow this over time and highly recommend you checking out our Squares and Streets work. So that's all I've got for you guys. Thank you so much, Grace and Trinity, for giving us the opportunity to share this wonderful work.